Chapter 2761. Qin Mu was also stunned when he heard this. Zhou Chengwang's face darkened. Qin Chun continued happily. If Zhou Chengwang can still be used in the future, Qin Mu, you must feel it well. This is the first time. Qin Mu gulped down a mouthful of saliva and caressed his tummy. Listening to such a hot topic, the little guy couldn't help but kick her. Kick her? Qin Mu bit her lip and looked at Zhou Chengwang. She was surprised, but he couldn't see, so he was naturally confused. Chengwang, look, the child can move. Tears glistened in her eyes. Zhou Zong, who had just been devastated, gritted his teeth and said, I can't see. Qin Mu took his palm and gently placed it on her belly. She said softly, Chengwang, do you feel it? Zhou Chengwang was in awe of this child. He carefully, even helplessly, felt the little squirm and then looked at Qin Mu. His expression made Qin Mu want to cry. But it was a cry of joy, because he was alive, because she was pregnant with his child. After so much, they were still together. Zhou Chengwang's palm gently touched her, and then he struggled to get up, although it took all his strength. However, he still held his wife and child in his arms. Qin Mu lay on his shoulder obediently. After a while, she said in a low voice, Chengwang, bring Shuemu here tomorrow. He hasn't seen you for a long time. His body froze. Qin Mu looked up at him. She didn't dare to let him sit for too long, so she helped him to lie down. She also lay down beside him, took his palm, and said softly, his name is Shuemu. He's my child, isn't he? Zhou Chengwang's voice was a little hoarse. Gu Zhe, is he willing? Yes. Qin Mu nodded, he is. She said softly, I also have some selfish motives. He probably won't find a wife for the rest of his life with Shuemu. Zhou Chengwang suddenly gritted his teeth. I heard that you live together. Qin Mu snorted to admit it. Zhou Chengwang just asked. After all, he thought that even if there was such a thing, nothing had happened. But his wife admitted it. She admitted it. His mind felt as if it had been struck by lightning, and it exploded with a bang. Then, he turned his face to his little wife and looked at her silently. Qin Mu smiled. Yes, if I hadn't found you, our child and Shuemu would have found father. Zhou Chengwang's fingers reached over and grabbed her hand. Have you ever kissed? Yes. Qin Mu deliberately made him angry. We kissed deeply. Zhou Zong's brain exploded again, as if he had been struck by lightning. He gritted his teeth. You can't let go of me, can you? I have to try other men. Qin Mu was still smiling. She now knew why Qin Shun felt so good when he was angry. It was a great sense of achievement to see others fuming with anger. She looked at Zhou Chengwang and said happily, so you have to live well, otherwise, she lowered her head and kissed his lips. I will find a new husband. Zhou Chengwang was angry. But it was useless to be angry. No one cared about him. Qin Mu seemed to be possessed by Qin Shun. She would do whatever she wanted to anger him. Chapter 2762. Zhou Chengwang was angry. A man who was sulking was a little childish. He ignored Qin Mu, and Qin Mu was not in a hurry. He had to solve his physical needs. Was he going to wet the bed without her when he went to the toilet? Therefore, Zhou Chengwang's anger didn't last more than 2 hours. When he felt a little uncomfortable, he began to call his little wife. Although he was a little uncomfortable, he still had to call her. He couldn't really wet the bed, could he? Mu, baby. Qin Mu, child's mother. Qin Mu ignored him and looked at him. Aren't you angry? Zhou Zong's face was the same color as his virgin liver. He coughed softly and said, I want to go to the toilet. Qin Mu smiled and said, Sure, no one is stopping you. Zhou Chengwang's face darkened, and he stared at her for a long time. However, he couldn't see, so it was useless to stare at her. Qin Mu kept him in suspense for a while, but she still served him. He had changed his liver. If the kidney was damaged, where would he find it? Although Zhou Chengwang was a little ashamed, he still coughed softly and joked with his wife. Mu, touch it and see if it works. Qin Mu stared at her hand and then looked at the shameless man. She was really speechless. Did this have anything to do with the liver? She didn't say anything, and Zhou Chengwang teased her a little more. Qin Mu went to deal with it and turned around to whisper in his ear, Zhou Chengwang, you're still restless. At the end of her words, she bit him. It made Zhou Chonla's heart itch, but there was nothing he could do. He reached out to catch her, and she left. After a while, he panted weakly. Qin Mu stopped playing with him and lay quietly beside him. It had been a long time since they had laid together so peacefully. They weren't together before, but later, he was sick and couldn't move. She leaned against his chest, put her little hands around his neck, and slowly tightened them. Zhou Chongwang chuckled. "Mumu, you're strangling me to death." Qin Mu raised her head and looked at him. She smiled and let go a little, resting her little face on his shoulder. After lying quietly for a while, Zhou Chongwang suddenly said, "Mumu, let's get married again, shall we?" Qin Mu looked a little happy. She reached out and pinched his face. "Aren't you afraid that you won't be able to give me happiness?" Then she said in a disdainful tone, "After all, she said, I don't know if my liver can still function. I just don't know if it's possible. So I have to hold on to you tightly." He grabbed her and sniffed her for a while. Following the scent, he moved the tip of his nose to her ear and said shamelessly, "If I can't take it anymore, use your fingers." And even though they were an old couple, Qin Mu still blushed when he said that. She bit her lip and did not say anything for a long time. Zhou Chongwang laughed, but then he became serious and his voice became lower. "Mumu, even if I know it's unfair, I still want you. I can't wait another day." Qin Mu still did not say anything, only hugging him tightly. After a long time, she said in a low voice, "I'll hire a lawyer tomorrow, but can you sign it?" Zhou Chongwang had obviously thought about this a long time ago. He hurriedly said, "I'll make a fingerprint." Qin Mu looked at him speechlessly. Chapter 2763. Zhou Chongwang, you were reluctant when we got married last time. She recalled the past and wanted to settle scores with him. Zhou Chongwang smiled and said, "So let's get married again to make you happy." At such a touching moment, Qin Mu couldn't help complaining. "Zhou Chongwang, you can't do anything now. How can I be happy?" Zhou Chongwang pulled her over and chuckled. "Didn't I say that I have fingers?" Qin Mu was speechless again. Sure enough, when a man was shameless, a woman had nothing to do with him. Their remarriage was indeed carried out in the ward. It was very simple, but Zhou Chongwang insisted on sitting up and even changed into a black suit. When the lawyer asked him to press his fingerprint, Zhou Chongwang looked a little confused. Qin Mu stood beside him and held his hand. Zhou Chongwang immediately held her hand and said in a low voice, "Mumu, it's me." Qin Mu saw the uncertainty and caution on his face, and tears welled up in her eyes. Only now did she know how much this man loved her. She chuckled softly and reached out to take him with her to press his handprint. "Chongwang, from now on, I'm your wife again," she said softly as she looked into his eyes. Zhou Chongwang grunted indifferently, but only he himself knew how excited he was at this moment. His muumuu was his again. The lawyer left with a smile, leaving them alone. Zhou Chongwang stretched his hand out to caress Qin Mu's face and kissed her lips lightly. Qin Mu let him do as he pleased, letting him kiss him gently. A few minutes later, she felt the change in him. The scene was quite at such a warm moment. Zhou Chongwang also felt that his wolf transformation was a little inappropriate, so he coughed and said, "Well, it seems that this liver is not bad." Qin Mu leaned on his shoulder and laughed softly. As time passed, Zhou Zong felt a little ashamed. After all, he was a patient with several broken ribs. It was really embarrassing to be in such a tender moment. Moreover, even if he was aroused, he didn't dare to act rashly. Firstly, Qin Mu was pregnant. Secondly, if he really did it, his bones would probably fall apart. Thinking about it, it was quite a pity. Qin Mu raised her head and kissed him lightly. "Zhou Chongwang, when you're better, I'll make it up to you." Like coaxing a child, she said, "Be good now." When Zhou Chongwang thought of the word compensation, his whole body froze, especially his liver. That was a virgin liver, and he had not tasted the taste of a woman. Thus, he patiently recuperated. His body recovered at an astonishing speed, and after a week, he could already get out of bed and walk. After 2 weeks, other than being blind, he could basically do some simple activities. Qin Shun felt that it was a little unbelievable, But in this way, Qin Mu felt a little more relaxed. Wherever he went, she just needed to support him. He could also take a shower, and he would even force her to help him take a shower. He stood in the bathroom, and every time, he was extremely happy and took advantage of her. Qin Mu felt that his taste was really getting heavier and heavier. She was pregnant, but he didn't even let go of her. That night, he still took advantage of her enough and walked out of the bathroom with her help. Because she was helping him take a shower, Qin Mu's clothes were wet. Under her transparent night dress, her body looked particularly seductive. Chapter 2764. Perhaps because of her pregnancy, some parts of her body were a size bigger, but her waist was still very thin from the back. When she passed by the sink, she inadvertently looked at the mirror. Then she saw a man's clear eyes. Qin Mu turned her head and glared at Zhou Chengwang. You can see it. As soon as she finished speaking, she was carried to the counter, and he was standing in the middle of her body. Qin Mu was a little shy. Chengwang. She bit her lip and buried her face in his neck. I'm pregnant. I know, Mumu. He turned her face and kissed her carefully. There was a nice smell on his body, unlike before when he only smelled of potions. His voice was very soft and gentle. I just want to try this liver to see if it works. Qin Mu was about to cry. She turned her face away and kissed him again. You've already proven it. He bit down hard on her neck and said unwillingly, I really don't want to use this liver to possess you. Qin Mu was speechless. After a long time, she said in a low voice, Zhou Chengwang, aren't you childish? Then, he did something very childish. He turned her face and kissed her bit by bit. Qin Mu bit her lip and pressed his shoulder with her little hand. Chengwang, be good. He coaxed her gently and kissed her slowly. Qin Mu was so scared that she called his name in a weak voice. Zhou Chengwang coaxed her and said in a low and hoarse voice, Be good, Mumu. I'll be gentle. Half an hour later, Qin Mu bit her lip and looked at the decadent scene in the mirror. She cried and said, Zhou Chengwang, are you done? He hugged her and said in a low and hoarse voice, Be good. I'll be done in a while. It was probably because he hadn't hugged her for a long time. Even though he was a little weak, he still did it for an hour. When he was exhausted, he reached out to hug her and wanted to take her back. Qin Mu bit his arm. You're crazy. Her forehead was covered in sweat, and her face was red. She glared at him. Do you want to die? When she saw the toilet paper in the trash can, she felt that she had no eyes to see. She propped herself up and tried to clean up the place. Zhou Chengwang stopped her. We are husband and wife. Isn't it normal to have sex once? Qin Mu was defeated by his cheekiness. She squinted at him and said, Zhou Zong, we are now in the ward. One is pregnant, and the other is seriously ill. If this gets out, we will be laughed at for a year. Zhou Chengwang rubbed his clean and good-looking chin, as if he was deep in thought. Yes, I have to get Bangshan to check on us tomorrow. If there's a problem, it won't be good. Qin Mu, sure enough, men are animals that think with their lower bodies. However, even though they were angry, it was still very warm when they lay together. Zhou Chengwang reached out to touch her belly and asked in a low voice, Are you hurt? Although he was excited, he had always been very gentle. The child should be fine. Qin Mu looked at him and lay on his chest. He's fine. Zhou Chengwang's heart softened. He bit her little face and said, Mu, you don't know how happy I am to have you again. I thought you would say that you can that again. Qin Mu rolled her eyes at him. She always felt that his illness was cured, but his old problems were the same. He was still the same as before, so good. Chapter 2765. Zhou Chengwang looked at his little wife and frowned. Mumu, am I such a superficial person in your heart? Qin Mu squeezed out a smile. Not only are you superficial, but you're also shameless. Zhou Chengwang's face darkened completely. After a moment, he reached out to hold her chin and said in a low voice, Then I'll just be completely shameless. There was a faint threat in his words. He had thought that Qin Mu would be afraid, but Qin Mu laughed and lay on his shoulder for a long time. Then, she said seriously, Zhou Chengwang, I like shameless people. Zhou Chengwang stared at his wife. For a moment, he didn't know whether to be happy or unhappy. Qin Mu hugged him and said softly, Chong Wang, go to bed early. She took his big palm and placed it on her lower abdomen. I'm going to the prenatal checkup tomorrow. Can you go with me? Zhou Chongwang looked at her. Qin Mu smiled and said, Chongwang, you're going to be a father. I know. His voice suddenly became hoarse. Qin Mu sighed. You can see the baby's photo tomorrow, although he's very, very young now. Zhou Chongwang's eyes were filled with indescribable warmth. He reached out to touch his little wife and kissed her forehead. Mu, I've never felt so lucky before. When he pushed Qin Mu away and hit the car, he thought that they would probably not be able to be together anymore. At that time, he only hoped that she could forgive him and let go. And the reason why he was a little forgetful tonight was because he wanted to make sure that all of this was true. He, Zhou Chongwang, had never been so useless before. That night, they hugged each other to sleep, and he had never felt so secure. His rejection period had not passed, but he believed that he would survive, because his Mumu loved him so much. The next day, when Zhou Chongwang looked at the little ball through the photo, he was extremely excited. Qin Shen told them the gender of the child. It was a little girl. Girls are good. Zhou Chongwang kissed Qin Mu's forehead, and his eyes were full of tenderness. It would be best if she could be a well-behaved little girl like you. Qin Mu's face turned slightly red. Qin Shen coughed. If you want to show off your love, do it home. Go home? Zhou Chongwang and Qin Mu looked at her. Yes, go home. Qin Chun chuckled. Isn't Zhou Chongwang's body fully recovered? She said the last sentence with a profound meaning. Qin Mu blushed. She wished she could kill Zhou Chongwang. As for Zhou Zong, he said proudly, then I won't waste public resources. Qin Chen snorted. What a beast. She added, take it easy. Qin Mu is pregnant. Zhou Chongwang smiled. Even if I don't want to take it easy, I don't have the ability to do so. After that, he went out to chase after his wife. Qin Chen looked at him silently and smiled. When Zhou Chongwang passed the rejection period, she would have to go back to New York. She should let go of what had happened a while ago. Qin Shun pursed her lips, packed up the examination materials, and walked out to her office. She sat there for the whole morning, and then she didn't want to go back to the hospital in the afternoon. She arranged for the nurse to move Zhou Chongwang's bed, and he should be home in the afternoon. Qin Mu was going to live in the villa, and it had been cleaned up. Qin Shin thought that it was good to be like this. Chapter 2766. But she just wanted to eat. Perhaps in that kind of atmosphere, she would feel that life was not so boring. The 24-year-old Qin Shin sometimes felt that life was so long. She could do something for herself to prolong her life, but she had never done that before. What Qin Shin did was costing her life, but she didn't care. If it wasn't for the promise she made to someone, she might not have the courage to live in this world. She changed her clothes and took her coat out of the elevator. She drove a Porsche, and when she was waiting at a red light, she searched for a vegetarian hot pot restaurant. It was quite famous, and it was an internet celebrity restaurant. She wanted to ask someone to eat with her, but after thinking about it, she didn't seem to have any friends. Yes, she had always been alone and was used to it. Half an hour later, she went to the vegetarian restaurant. The restaurant's business was especially good. In the summer, the steaming hot pot made people's faces flush red, both men and women. The waitress smiled and said, Sir, how many people are in your party? She looked at Qin Shin's dignified, young, and good-looking appearance and asked, Are you here with your girlfriend? Qin Shin didn't mind and said calmly, Alone. The waitress's eyes lit up. Such a good-looking customer actually didn't have a girlfriend. Although she knew that it was impossible for her to be with the person in front of her, it was still very pleasant to serve him. The waitress immediately brought Qin Shun to a better seat. Sir, please take a seat. She pulled out the chair for Qin Shin. Just as Qin Shin was about to sit down, he saw that the person sitting beside him was someone she was familiar with. Lan Yu and Lin Cece. They sat facing each other. Lan Yu was dressed very outstandingly today, while Lin Cece looked at Lan Yu with her chin in her hands, her expression a little indescribable. Qin Shin looked at her for a few more seconds, but the waitress misunderstood and whispered, Is she your girlfriend? How pitiful. Such a good-looking man was actually cheated on. Qingmu looked at the waitress and said calmly, "No." The moment she spoke, the people at the table noticed her. Lin Cece was the first to speak. She seemed to be very surprised. "It's Dr. Qin." As for Lan Yu, his expression was indifferent, and his gaze was deep. No one could tell what he was thinking. Qinshan looked at Lin Cece and nodded. Lin Cece looked at Lan Yu. "Shall we share a table?" Lan Yu looked at Qinshan, smiled, and said to Lin Cece in front of him, "Didn't you say you wanted to thank me? Why did you thank Dr. Qin?" Lin Cece smiled sweetly. "Are you jealous?" Lan Yu smiled faintly. "I don't understand what you mean." Lin Cece's smile was a little seductive. "I know." She leaned over and said softly, "I'm more suitable for you than Dr. Qin." She was sweet, and at that moment, her breath was like orchids full of temptation. "If the Grand Hyatt Hotel has my father's support, you should know what kind of heights it will rise to." Lan Yu looked at her and smiled. "Don't you like Dr. Qin? He rejected me." Lin Cece was still smiling. "And now, I'm more interested in you." There was a hint of a smile at the corner of Lan Yu's mouth, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You should know that Dr. Qin and I both like men." He also brought up Qinshan without batting an eyelid. Chapter 2767. Lan Yu smiled. "Little girl, don't have any ideas about me. I'm not the kind of man you think I am." Lin Cece leaned back. "You've already broken up, but you still can't forget him. Mr. Lan is more infatuated with him than I thought." Lan Yu's voice turned cold. "Didn't you let her see it on purpose?" If he wasn't wrong, Lin Cece must have hacked Qinshan's phone. That was why she knew that Qinshan was going to eat here and asked him to meet here. His company happened to be nearby. This was all a coincidence and Lin Cece's premeditated plan. This was so that the separated man and woman could be separated more thoroughly. Lin Cece's target had always been Qinshan. It had never changed, and he came out just to find out what she wanted to do. That was all. He, Lan Yu, had no interest in such a perverted and ignorant girl. But looking at Qinshan's reaction, he found it quite interesting. Although it was faint, it looked very displeased. To be able to make Dr. Qin unhappy was the best thing for Lan Yu. They were whispering back and forth. It wasn't very friendly, but their voices were low. In the eyes of others, it was a very intimate conversation between a man and a woman. Qinshan's vegetarian pot arrived. She ate quietly and chose not to listen to their conversation. Of course, she couldn't hear it clearly. She only knew that Lin Cece seemed to be very happy under Lan Yu's teasing. She giggled. She ate her food expressionlessly and didn't leave because of who it was. She ate for about half an hour and then stood up to pay the bill. All her actions were done in one go. It was beautiful and exquisite. Almost all the women in the restaurant were looking at Qinshan. They couldn't take their eyes off her. Lan Yu was also very handsome. However, this kind of handsome was definitely not as stunning as Qinshan. Her natural exquisiteness made women couldn't help but look at her. The Prince Charming in every girl's imagination was probably someone like Qinshan. When Qinshan left, he didn't even look at Lan Yu, let alone Lin Cece. When they paid the bill, the waiter was still the same. He whispered, "It's good to be optimistic. Little girls these days are messing around." Qinshan signed expressionlessly, then said to the waiter in a serious tone, "That man is my ex-boyfriend." After saying that, he slowly left. The remaining waitress was left in a state of confusion. Heavens, she was mistaken. Ex-boyfriend? Is this gentleman? Gee, such a good-looking man actually likes men. The waiter wiped his tears. This world was too unfair. Then, when she went to clean up Qinshan's table, she looked at the adulterous couple with even more hostility. Especially when he looked at Lan Yu, his gaze was filled with disdain. "You've been such a handsome man. Are you going to take responsibility till the end?" It was too infuriating. When Lan Yu met that gaze, his heart skipped a beat. Then he looked at Lin Cece. "Thank you. This meal is on me." Lin Cece wanted to say something, but Lan Yu already said, "Also, don't have any ideas about Qinshan. Even if she breaks up with me, it's not your turn." Lin Cece smiled from ear to ear. "Why are you so sure, Mr. Lan?" "Because Qinshan is a woman." Lan Yu stood up and smiled faintly. "I've checked the goods. It can't be wrong. Lin Cece didn't say anything. There was not much expression on her face. Chapter 2768. After he left, Lin Cece looked at the direction in which he left and smiled. I knew it. The first time she saw Qin Shun, she knew that she was a woman. That was exactly what she liked. Such a perfect person was what she imagined him to be. She believed that if she and Qin Shun were together, she could give Qin Shun everything he wanted. Qin Shun's identity was too dangerous. Only she could keep Qin Shun safe. This was something that Qin Shun would know. Lin Cece soon left. No one knew that she was the world's top hacker, K. She knew much more about Qin Shun than Lan Yu, including the French-Chinese-American noble named Rong Lei. Qin Shun drove around and didn't drive back to her apartment until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. After parking the car, she walked to the elevator and saw a slender figure standing there. Qin Shun paused for a moment and then walked slowly over there. When she passed by Blue Universe, she pressed the button for the elevator and asked calmly, "Is it possible to move something that was left here?" He nodded, yes. Qin Shun didn't say much to him and allowed him to enter the elevator. They stood in the elevator and looked at each other in silence. She didn't want to speak, but Lan Yu said, "Don't you wonder why Lin Cece and I are together? She said today that she wants to pursue you." Qin Shun said expressionlessly. Lan Yu looked at her and said in a low and hoarse voice, "You don't care?" Qin Shun looked into his eyes. Lan Yu said softly, "A man who has slept with himself will generally feel uncomfortable when he is with someone else." Qin Shun smiled. When it comes to unavoidable things, it doesn't matter even if you're uncomfortable, because it's irreversible, just like human life. She said it very calmly, but it angered him. He stared into her eyes and said word by word, "If this man was Rong Lei, would you still not care?" He was so angry that he had forgotten his original intention of coming here. Actually, he wasn't such a childish man, but he still couldn't let it go, and more than that, he couldn't accept it. They had only been living together for a few days, and it was over before they could even start. However, as soon as he finished speaking, he regretted it. These words were undoubtedly hurtful to Qin Shun. Sure enough, her originally calm face became somewhat cold. She just looked at him. When the elevator arrived, she didn't go out. Instead, she pressed the button for the second floor. Mr. Lan probably doesn't care about worldly possessions. "If I find something that doesn't belong to me, I'll throw it away," she said coldly, and looked away from him. Lan Yu's jaw tightened, and his fingers clenched into fists. After a long time, he said in a low and hoarse voice, "You don't care at all. To you, I'm dispensable. Once you find out that I touch your forbidden area, will I be kicked out?" "Yes." Qin Shun looked at him and said firmly, "You are nothing to me." Lan Yu's expression changed instantly. After a long time, he laughed softly. "I underestimated Dr. Qin's heart of stone and your infatuation." When he said the last 4 words, Qin Shun looked at him. Her voice was full of mockery. "Lan Yu, how much do you know? Not everyone is as fickle as you are." Her words had thoroughly infuriated him. The next second, he pressed her against the wall of the elevator. Chapter 2769. Lan Yu gently pinched her chin with his slender fingers and moved his face closer. "Since you're keeping your chastity for a dead person, why do you still sleep with me? I'm the one who makes you feel comfortable, right?" Qin Shun narrowed his eyes, and a slap was already thrown over. The sound was crisp and clear. This was also the first time that Qin Shun behaved like a woman. She stared at Lan Yu. Lan Yu's face was slapped to the side. He slowly turned around and looked at her. Suddenly, he smiled lightly. "Qin Shun, I'm just an ordinary man, and you're destined to be extraordinary, so I'm probably really forcing it." He smiled helplessly and bitterly. "I'm sorry. I was impulsive. I shouldn't have offended the person in your heart, let alone offended you." He was wrong, very wrong. How could he have thought that Qin Shun could be with him forever? Qin Shun was also wrong. She was wrong to be so dazzling and damn attractive to him. He had no doubt that as long as Qin Shun wanted to seduce someone, she only needed to show a little bit, and no matter whether the person was a man or a woman, they would be fooled. She was a poison between men and women, or to put it bluntly, an aphrodisiac. Lan Yu stared at him for a long time and chuckled. Qin Shun, we always quarrel like this. Maybe we're really not suited for each other. It's also good to separate. With that, he slowly exited the elevator. When Lan Tsong turned around, he heard Qin Shin's voice from behind. It's not like that. His body froze. Then, he slowly turned his head to look at her. Qin Shin leaned against the elevator. Her eyes were a little confused, and her expression was more fragile than he had ever seen. At this moment, Qin Shin was no longer that popular young man, but more like a little girl. The corners of her mouth trembled slightly. After a long time, she said in a low voice, I won't be with my patient for a long time. She looked at Lan Yu and said, that feeling of powerlessness. Lan Yu, you don't understand. Her voice was so soft that it sounded like she was murmuring. In just a moment, he disappeared. He disappeared from the top floor. She laughed, but her face was full of tears. They say he is dead. They say Rong Lei is dead. But I don't believe that such a person would die. Her expression was extremely fragile. Lan Yu, don't come looking for me anymore. I can't bear the pain of losing another person. She hugged her head with her hands. It's been so many years. I'm fine alone. I have no worries, no heartache. She slowly squatted down, alone, squatting in the corner of the elevator. She cried like a child. Lan Yu stood there and looked at her quietly. He told himself that she was right, that he should leave now, that they were not of the same world. However, his feet did not move. He had never seen Qin Shun like this before. Even in his imagination, he couldn't imagine it. But his heart ached. It really hurt. He took a step forward and picked her up. Qin Shun, I'll take you home. At this moment, he didn't have that intention. He wasn't a young boy anymore. Although his heart ached, although he was reluctant, and he still liked her, he wouldn't easily decide to be with her again. Moreover, this kind of thing wasn't one-sided. Who knew if Qin Shun would regret it when she woke up tomorrow? Lan Yu held her and reached out to press the elevator button, but the person in his arms whispered, Don't go home. Chapter 2770. This was killing Lan Yu. He hugged her and said in a loving voice, Chun Chun, where do you want to go? I'll take you there. She leaned against him and gently hugged his waist with her fingers. She put her face on his shoulder and whispered, To your place. Lan Yu's body was a little tense, and he narrowed his eyes. Do you know what this means? Qin Shun pursed her lips. Lan Yu, you don't want to? She tightened her slender hands on his back. Or you don't want me anymore? How could he not want her? Every pore of his was clamoring for her. He quickly returned to his car and kissed her for a long time before starting the car. When he let go of her, his eyes lingered on her red and swollen lips. 3 of the buttons on her shirt were undone. At this time, she no longer looked like a man, but a woman who was so sexy that it was hard to breathe. Lan Yu drove the car back to his villa at the fastest speed he had ever driven in his life. The villa was not big. It only had 2 floors and a total area of more than 400 square meters. There was only one big suite on the 2nd floor, the master bedroom, the living room, and the study. He hugged her and kissed her in the living room before he could go back to the master bedroom. Under the dim light, the clothes fell to the ground one by one. Under the dim light, Qin Shin's curves were like a goddess. Lan Yu worshipped and praised her. In the extreme joy, they had each other over and over again as if they didn't know fatigue. It was not until the sky was about to turn bright that he hugged her and fell asleep on the spacious sofa. Around them, the clothes were still scattered messily, but no one cared about them. Lan Yu lived alone. He was a family man and paid attention to his privacy. Usually, he would only have part-time workers on weekends. Therefore, he didn't think that their slutty behavior would be seen by others. However, they had been seen by others. It was Lan Yu's mother who came. She had been worried about Lan Yu recently, so she came to see him. It was long past the time to get up, but her son's house was quiet. She wondered if he had gone to work. But the more he went to the 2nd floor, the more he felt that something was wrong. It felt as though a man and a woman had done it before. Lan Yu's mother was also an experienced person, so she was naturally very sensitive. The sliding door to the living room was open. Standing in the doorway, she froze. At this time, The morning light shone through the white French curtains. It was gentle and warm, and it also allowed the scene inside to be seen clearly. Lanyu was lying flat on his back. He was only wearing a pair of boxer shorts. It was black and looked very sexy. In his arms, there was a girl. She was very tall. He was only wearing a Lanyu shirt that reached above his knees, and his back was facing him. Lanyu's mother stared at the pair of legs. They were indeed very beautiful. She had seen many models, but none of them had such a long and slender figure. Furthermore, they were very fair and very pleasing to the eye. The girl's face was buried in Lanyu's neck, and one of her hands was wrapped around Lanyu. This sleeping position was very beautiful. Lanyu's mother was comforted. Her son had finally found a decent girl. But she frowned again. Was it a little too fast to get on the bed now? At this moment, Lanyu woke up. When he opened his eyes, he saw his mother staring at him blankly. He said in a hoarse voice, "Mom, why are you here?" Chapter 2771. Blue Mother stammered. "Come and have a look since you have someone here. I'll go first." "You're busy." Young people, when they wake up, they have to make a mess again. Blue Mother's face is still red. Lanyu frowned and wanted to say something. Qin woke up. She heard the sound and looked in the direction of the sound. Immediately, Blue Mother called with her. Qin sat up and grabbed his short hair. And Mother Lan was also shocked. "God, it's the venomous Dr. Qin." Blue Mother looked carefully, and it was really her. Looking at the clothes around, they were all men's shirts and trousers. Blue Mother's heart sank again. It can't be wrong. After a while of surprise, Qin grabbed his hair and looked at Lanyu. "Well, I'll wash it first, you talk." She was about to get up, and Lanyu grabbed her hand. "Go to the second cabinet in my dressing room to get clothes. They're clothes I wore in college. The size should be about the same as yours now." Qin nodded and walked into the master bedroom. There were only Blue Mother and son in the living room. Lanyu didn't avoid his mother, so he got up in a pair of shorts, packed up his and Qin's clothes, and threw them into the laundry basket. His movements were very smooth, as if he was packing his own and his wife's clothes. Blue Mother looked at it, and it took her a long time to find her voice. "You and her. How come again? Didn't they say they broke up? How can you break up and get out immediately?" And also came to Lanyu. In her heart, Qin is a very proud person and will not easily step into other people's place. Lanyu put on a pair of trousers, casually found shirt to put on, sat on the sofa, took out a cigarette, lit it, and took a long smoke. "Mom, there was an accident yesterday." He paused for a moment. And her, it depends on what she thinks. He is not so naive. She wanted him last night, but it doesn't mean she still wants him today. To put it bluntly, you shouldn't take biological matters too seriously in the hearts of adults. If you took it seriously, you would lose. He might not have seen countless people, but he had at least had a few women, and he had not seen through all of them. However, it was Qin's first time, but he saw through it thoroughly and put it into practice more thoroughly. From the beginning, he had lost. Blue Mother is a little worried. This kind of worry is called afraid that her son will be played. She hesitated for a moment. Should I talk to her again? Forget it. Lanyu smiled. You can't communicate with her. Blue Mother is a little lost. Indeed, the Lan family was not bad, but the Qin family was better. Moreover, Qin was a medical genius, while she was just a housewife. There was really no common language between them. From the bottom of her heart, Lanyu's mother approved of Qin's appearance when she saw his back and legs. It's a girl at first sight, and it should be a very good girl. If it weren't for the strange habit of wearing men's clothes, Lanyu's past dark history wouldn't be worthy of other girls. Blue Mother's heart hesitated, and finally sighed. I'll go back first, Lanyu. You can do it. Chapter 2772. After she finished speaking, Lanyu was also moved. His mother's words were not excessive. He thought for a moment and smiled. Okay, Mom, I promise you. Blue Mother smiled. Then I'm leaving. Lanyu walked her downstairs and watched the driver drive away. Back upstairs, Qin had already come out of the bathroom and was drying his hair with a towel. She was wearing a set of white sportswear from his college days. She was very refreshing and pleasing to the eye. She was not so masculine and very neutral. Lan Yu hugged her and kissed her on the neck. He murmured, "Are you unhappy?" Qin Shun put down the towel and smiled. "This is your home. Your mother is here. What's there to be unhappy about?" He didn't let go of her and continued to smell the good smell on her body. It was the smell of a shower gel he used to use. At this moment, she had it on her body, as if she was stained with all of him. He was a little moved and wanted to do it again, but he couldn't figure out what she was thinking at the moment. So he kept his composure and probed step by step. "If you were my wife, I think you have the right to be unhappy when my mother comes over." He chuckled, then picked up the towel beside him and continued to dry her hair. Qin Shin looked at him. "Do you want to get married? Is it strange?" He said casually, "I have to get married." Qin Shun was obviously stunned for a moment. Then he asked softly, "Is this your test?" Lan Yu slowly slowed down as he dried his hair. Then he put down the towel and admitted, "Yes, it's a test. Qin Shun, I want to date you on the premise of marriage, not just cohabitation." He emphasized, "We don't have to live together, but we can eat together when we're free. I'll cook for you. We can also go to the movies like others and travel together." When he said this, his eyes were very gentle, and his expression was a little moved. Qin Shin lowered his eyes and smiled. "I thought you still hated me before last night. Without love, where does hatred come from?" He bit her ear and felt her softening, so he said more seductively, "And I'll be free on weekends. We can make love all night, okay?" "No." Qin Shin pushed him away. Lan Yu's face was a little dark. He thought he had been rejected. Qin Shin walked to the French window, opened the curtains, and turned his head. "That's not healthy. You have to control it." Lan Yu looked at her with a blank expression. "What? You don't understand." Qin Shin smiled. "Do you want me to explain it to you word by word?" Then he muttered to himself, "I'm starting to doubt your intelligence." Before she could finish, he had already walked over and hugged her. Hugging her tightly, he buried his face in her shoulder and said hatefully, "Do you know how hateful you are?" "I know." Qin Shun was still smiling. "So you have to give in to me. Do you know how hateful you are?" He bit her fiercely to vent his hatred. "Little thing," he said in a deep and husky voice, "although it's not healthy, I still want to do it." After that, he cupped her face and kissed her. His kisses landed on her little face, as if the sun was kissing her. Qin Shin closed her eyes, and her slender hands hugged his waist. Just once. Chapter 2773. When she woke up again, it was already 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Qin Shun was sleeping in the master bedroom. She opened her eyes and looked at the long white curtains in front of the French windows and the Nordic furniture. Lan Yu's bedroom was very simple, but it was very refreshing. It was the way she liked it. Qin Shun sat up with the bedsheet wrapped around her. She looked up and suddenly found an oil painting hanging on the bedside table. It was her on the painting. That night, she was wearing Lan Yu's black shirt and sitting on the piano. So he had hung it here. Qin Shun looked at it carefully and reached out to touch it gently, as if she was touching a dream. The soft sunlight shone on her face, making her expression look even gentler. Lan Yu stood at the door of the bedroom and looked at her gently. "Although I'm very angry, I still hung it on the bedside table. It's very beautiful." He smiled and walked over. He bent down and knelt in front of her, leaning over and kissing her. Qin Shun reached out and hugged his neck, so she didn't care that the bedsheet fell. She hugged him and kissed him lightly. She smiled gently. What if he brings someone back one day and see it? Lan Yu's forehead was against hers, and he was still smiling. "If that's the case, I'll hide it in advance, because I'm afraid she will feel inferior when she sees it." Qin Shun chuckled and bit his lips. "Really? Isn't it better to be a new lover? No one will be as good as you." Lan Yu's big palm was a little unruly again. "You vixen. Isn't it more like a man?" She didn't stop him and obediently enjoyed his service in the bedroom. He was always pleasing her. She liked his skills. She suspected that he had painted human bodies before, so he was so familiar with women's bodies. The result of this indulgence was that they warmed up on the bed again. In the end, he was finally satisfied. After washing her, he carried her to the dining room. During this time, she only had his black shirt on. He liked it when she wore it like this. "Try my cooking. He had made a few exquisite Thai dishes for her today, and they looked very good. Chin Shun was originally a very exquisite person. After eating, he felt very satisfied. Lan Yu sat across from her and looked at her satisfied expression. He then asked seriously, Chun Shun, which part of me do you think is the most important? He raised his hand. Is my hand more important, or my lips more important, or... In the back, he winked at her. She should understand. As a doctor, Chin Shun naturally understood. Otherwise, as a woman, she would also understand. Lan Yu served her a bowl of winter eel soup and whispered, Eat slowly, it's a little spicy. Chin Shun took a sip before answering him. I can't do without any of them. Her expression was a little mischievous as she spoke. Lan Yu was a little dazed. After a moment, he came back to his senses and said with a smile, Do you want to try them one by one? Chin Shun looked at him with a somewhat meaningful gaze. After a moment, she whispered, Haven't you tried them all? They're more powerful ones. Do you want to try? Lan Yu smiled. This time, the way Chin Shun looked at him was a little different. After a long time, she wiped her fingers clean and said with a smile, As a vegetable, aren't you too excited? An exquisite scalpel appeared in her hand, as if by magic. She waved the blade at him. Chapter 2774. Lan Yu narrowed his eyes. He had never known that Chin Shun had such an ability. Where did she hide the scalpel? However, he suddenly recalled that he had stripped her naked, but she had a black crystal wristwatch on her hand. The small scalpel was hidden in the wristwatch. He got up and walked over. He knocked the scalpel out of her hand and hugged her from behind. He kissed her little neck and said in a low voice, Baby, be careful. It's easy for me to lose something important. As he hugged and kissed her like that, he slowly became aroused. Eventually, he carried her back to the master bedroom. Chin Shun placed her slender fingers on his lips and smiled. Lan Yu, you're too indulgent. His hands did not stop as he chuckled. I want to indulge myself today so that you can compare yourself with me. He had never been like this before. He felt that it was worth it to die for her from dawn to dusk. They lingered for the entire afternoon. When she woke up, it was already 9 o'clock. When she woke up, she was in his arms. It was a little late at night, and her voice was a little hoarse. Lan Yu, are we really in love? Lan Yu reached out and hugged her slender body. They hugged and waited for the light to come together in the dark night. In her countless dark nights, there had never been someone like Lan Yu who accompanied her so thoroughly. She whispered, Lan Yu, will we be together forever? Yes. He smiled. As long as you don't leave me, we will always be together. Chin Shun lay in his arms and looked up at his blurry face. She smiled gently. All right, let's try it once. She then said softly, Maybe I'm not used to wearing a dress, but I'll try to wear it for you at home. But you're not allowed to laugh. You can wear men's clothes for the rest of your life. Lan Yu reached out and played with her short hair. Just wear my shirt at home. She clenched her fists and punched his shoulder. How could she not know his dark thoughts? They hugged each other until dawn. Only when the sunlight was gentle did she fall asleep. After falling asleep, she dreamed of the sound of K-pop unraveling. This time, there was no blood in the dream, no parting. The only thing that accompanied her was Lan Yu's heavy aura. In the afternoon, he dragged her up and kissed her heavy eyelids. Chin Shun, let's fall in love. Chin Shun was lying on the bed. Lan Yu, I thought that in your understanding, love is to make love nonstop. If you can bear it, of course I'm willing. He raised his hand to unbutton his shirt, but Chin Shun stopped him. She bit her lip and looked at him. Let's go out. She sat up and sat on one of his legs, looking a little distressed. Lan Yu, where are we going? Are we going to an art exhibition or a medical exhibition? He looked at her, his eyes bright and clear. After a long time, he reached out and pinched her nose. Chin Shun, you really haven't been in a relationship before. He lifted the quilt and got up, not avoiding to confess his feelings in front of her. Chin Shun bit her lip. Pervert, only for you. He bent down, pinched her face, and then carried her into the bathroom. Let's shower together. When they came out, it was an hour later. As soon as Chin Shun got into the car, she complained that she was hungry. Chapter 2775. Lan Yu tilted his head and looked at her with a smile in his eyes. Qinshan must not know how cute her expression was at that moment. She also did not know that she was acting coquettishly. Unknowingly, she had become a woman in love. However, she did not know it herself. Lan Yu's gaze became very gentle. He reached out and stroked her hair. You should have more. Your skin is abnormally white. Therefore, he had always thought that she was too beautiful. She was as pretty as a girl because her skin was too white. Qinshan glanced at him and snorted. He did not say anything else. Lan Yu picked a French restaurant. When he walked in with Qinshan, it was quite a commotion. Two equally outstanding men appeared in an extremely intimate manner. Obviously, little show was Qinshan. Lan Yu was very at ease. So was Qinshan. They never had any psychological pressure. They sat down together and ordered their meal. The waiters were secretly watching them. They were so much more attractive than the pair that was very popular on the internet. Moreover, they were very natural and not pretentious. Lan Yu ordered and pushed his order to Qinshan. Do you want to add anything? Actually, he had been paying attention to these things. He knew what Qinshan liked to eat. She could eat chicken chop rice when she was busy. However, once she was not busy, she would probably not even look at that kind of food. He knew how difficult it was to take care of her. The waiter first served the aperitif and dessert. Qinshan raised his eyebrows. Mine? What else? Is it mine? Lan Yu smiled. Don't all girls like this? Qinshan looked at him and said softly, just eat at home. Look at me now. It's a little weird. It's weird when we're together. Lan Yu did not care. He forked a small piece of dessert and sent it to her lips. Be good. Eat a little. Qinshan was usually thick-skinned, but he still blushed at this moment. She took the spoon from his hand and whispered, I'll do it myself. However, he still felt a little awkward. A grown man eating dessert in a French restaurant. In the past, she would still put on an act outside. A girl's hobby was to not let others see her when she was alone. But now, she didn't care if others saw Lan Yu. She said she wanted to be serious with him, so she didn't have to pretend. She would try her best to be what he liked. The compromise, she thought, was that it was important for them to get along. Qinshan only ate less than half of it before he took a sip of aperitif to suppress his hunger. When a main course arrived, she ate in silence. Etiquette prevented her from talking too much to Lan Yu. He wasn't affectionate either. Just like her, he quietly enjoyed the world of the two of them. Suddenly, the lights in the dining room slowly went out. Then, candles floated on the surrounding walls. The silver candlesticks lit the candlelight. It was very romantic. A golden-haired foreign man was playing the violin beside them. He was playing the song Butterfly Lovers. Qinshan had grown up abroad and was very westernized. However, she had a little understanding of China's classical music. She looked at Lan Yu in surprise, her gaze filled with affection. This was very rare for Qinshan. She could feel his sincerity towards her, and it was not that she was not touched. When a man finished playing, she held Lan Yu's hand and said in a low voice, The mood is right, but it's too sad. Is this the result you wanted? Chapter 2776. When a man was done, she held Lan Yu's hand and said in a low voice, The mood is right, but it's too sad. Is this what you want? Whether we live or die, we'll be together. Isn't this a good ending? Lan Yu smiled. He then took a rose from the man's hand and gave it to Qinshan. Qinshan looked at the fresh rose and said after a while, Lan Yu, you're an artist and have romantic thoughts, but I'm a doctor. In my world, love may be important, but life and death are more important. He smiled. So, we'll live well together until we're very old. We'll live until you can't even walk away if you want to. He hugged her from behind and kissed her cheek. He didn't care if others saw him or pointed at him. He said that he didn't care what she looked like outside. She looked good enough in men's clothes. So what if others thought he liked men? He only needed to know the beauty of his woman. Qinshan turned his face and looked at him with a deep gaze. Lan Yu knew that she had always been low-key. He asked in a low voice, Are you angry? No. Qinshan smiled. I'm very happy. She even kissed him on the lips, not caring what others thought. Lan Yu was stunned. He didn't think that Qinshan would be willing and like him doing this. He didn't want to do what all boyfriends did. Or rather, he wanted to test her. Yes, test her. She said that they wanted to be together. In his heart, he might not believe her. So he brought her out to test her. He felt a little guilty seeing her like this. He felt that he had gone overboard. Qin was like a blank piece of paper when it came to relationships. If he liked her, he liked her. If he didn't like her, he didn't like her. She would say whatever she felt, just like how she was only willing to be friends with him in the past. She made it clear. Now that she said that she wanted to be serious, he didn't believe her. For the first time, Lan Yu was in a sorry state. He felt that he was too evil. He hugged her without saying a word. He had never expected her to be so naive. She had no idea how bad men could be. Qin, I'm sorry. His voice was low and hoarse. Qin looked at him. Lan Yu, what's wrong? He hugged her tighter and whispered, I'm sorry I'm late. This sentence made her smile. She put her hand on the back of his and said very softly, it's not too late to come now. He didn't say anything else and just felt her warmth. The people around them were all watching them. No one would think that they were wrong, because it was obvious that they loved each other deeply. At least, that was what the man who was hugging her said. He was so excited that it was as if he had won 5 million. Lan Yu, how much longer do you want to hug me? Qin whispered, I'm a little hungry. I want to eat something. The look in Lan Yu's eyes was indescribable. At such a warm moment, she actually wanted to eat something. Did I say something wrong? Qin asked carefully. Then, a scalpel appeared in his hand. Or is your steak too tough? Should I cut it into small pieces for you? You idiot. Lan Yu suppressed himself. Chapter 2777. I know. Lan Yu's voice was very low. But you're still an idiot. Qin snorted. Is this the best way for you to express your feelings? Qin pursed her lips and reached out to poke his shoulder. You're very stupid. The whole restaurant is looking at us. Then let them see, Lan Yu said indifferently. Then, he held her lips and kissed her deeply. His kiss was very deep, and Qin's cheeks were deeply sunk in. She patted his shoulder, but she couldn't stop him. She only patted his shoulder when she was panting. Lan Yu, do you want to be on the social news? Then do it. He retreated a little and gazed into her eyes. At most, they will write about 2 men hugging and kissing, right? Let them write it. I want to kiss you now. Lan Yu's voice became very lingering. His kiss also began to be very gentle. He kissed her lips lightly and said hoarsely, if we weren't in the restaurant, I would choose to carry you to the bedroom. She didn't know that she was the most powerful medicine. Lan Yu had never been so indulgent in the past. Qin bit him lightly. Although she stopped him, her voice was filled with indulgence. Okay, let's go back, okay? Lan Yu let go of her, probably because he got her promise. His face was very restrained and very abstinent. But his behavior just now had a sense of freedom that only an artist would have. Qin said that he was a doctor. He was so strict that he didn't fit in with a person like Lan Yu. But they were strangely together and very harmonious. The lights in the restaurant were turned on again, and the photos of them kissing in the candlelight quickly made the headlines of all the news. Lan Yu and Qin's identities were uncovered. One was the CEO of a top hotel chain, and the other was a world-class genius doctor. Their identities were similar, but the key was that they were both men. The kissing scene in the photo was beautiful, but it couldn't change the fact that they were 2 men. That night, thunder and lightning flashed. Qin's apartment was closer, so they ran to her apartment. When he arrived at the door, he realized that everyone was drenched. Qin leaned against the door and smiled softly. He hooked Lan Yu's collar with one hand and gently pulled him toward himself. Her voice whispered against his lips, after tonight, we will be celebrities tomorrow. There's no need for tomorrow. It'll probably be spread all over the world tonight. Lan Yu chuckled and kissed the corner of her mouth. Are you ready? Qin, if you're not ready to announce your gender, do you mind? She enjoyed his kiss, raised her head, and looked into his clear eyes. Lan Yu chuckled. It depends on you. If you want to be a man, then I don't mind. Qin reached out and hugged him. Her red lips moved close to his ear. Lan Yu, hug me. She opened her door with one hand and hugged him with the other, letting him carry her into the dark room. In the past, she was very afraid of the dark, but now she didn't seem to be afraid. Because of Lan Yu, his body was warm. He placed her on the sofa in the dim light. He removed all of her. In the dark night, she was like the goddess Venus, blooming for him. Lan Yu called her name over and over again. Chapter 2778. Late at night, just as Lan Yu and Qin Shun were enjoying each other's company, in the presidential suite on the top floor of the GM Hotel in B City, a slender figure stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, quietly gazing at the city. Chun, this is your hometown. I'm coming. He gazed at the window quietly, his fingers slowly tightening. A cold female voice came from behind him. Young Master Rong, I've got the news. She's living alone in an apartment now. Anna, give me the address. I'll go look for her now. The man's voice was slightly hoarse. Immediately, he turned his head. His face was handsome, and he had a very noble aura about him. He was wearing a gray shirt and black trousers. It was a simple outfit, but he looked very good in it. Beside his hand was an antique porcelain cup with the royal seal of the last century. Just this cup alone was worth millions of pounds. Anna looked at her master with a troubled expression. The man raised an eyebrow. What's the problem? Anna pursed her lips. She's with another man. The antique porcelain cup in Rong Lei's hand that was worth millions of pounds shattered into pieces. His palm was cut into a bloody mess. Drops of blood dripped onto the pure white wool carpet, but he didn't feel it at all. Anna pursed her lips and handed him a photo. Lan Yu, Chinese-American, the CEO of the world's largest hotel chain. He used to be an artist and is very famous in the industry. That photo was held in Rong Lei's blood-stained palm. Rong Lei looked at the photo quietly. He watched as his Qin hugged and kissed another man. Qin, I haven't seen such a little girl's expression in your eyes for a long time. I thought you'd sealed your heart for me, but you still betrayed my feelings. Rong Lei closed his eyes slightly. With a flick of his fingers, the photo turned into ashes. Anna, who was standing at the side, was shocked. Master, do you need me to deal with that man? Rong Lei quietly walked to the side of the luxurious desk. He took a tissue and gently wiped the blood off his hands. His voice was very slow. No need. To get rid of a person, you have to completely eradicate him from his heart. Just taking his life is not enough. He knew his Qin the best. The fact that she could let that man kiss her meant that she was moved. She had given herself to someone else so easily. Rong Lei closed his eyes. Give me the address. Anna hesitated for a moment and gave him the address. Night, wind, and rain intertwined. On the top floor of the building opposite Qin Shen's apartment stood a black figure. He stood there quietly, his gaze falling on the penthouse of the opposite building. The huge floor-to-ceiling windows formed a huge wall. Inside, it was dim and dark. Lightning flashed and thunder roared. The world turned bright in an instant. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, he saw a man and a woman entangled in the apartment opposite. The contrast between the black and the white was like a dream. His Qin, under another man's body, was like a white lotus blooming. The body that he had been reluctant to possess was now entangled with another man. Rong Lei looked at them quietly. It was as if he could hear their panting. He could even feel the pleasure of her body. He had been with her for too long. He understood her and could even feel her senses sometimes. At this moment, she was in the midst of great joy. She was about to fall in love with a man named Lan Yu. Chapter 2779. Rong Lei narrowed his eyes and looked at her quietly, letting the pain cut through his heart. Qin, I'm back. Why didn't you wait for me for one more year? A year ago, she was still alone. A year later, there was someone else by her side. She treated that man so passionately, as if she had forgotten their past, and that she had once said, Rong Lei, if you don't exist in this world, then I will become you, become another Rong Lei. For so many years, he had watched from afar as she turned into herself. He had watched as she sealed her heart in ice. He had watched as she kept people at a distance of 1,000 miles. She became another person, Rong Lei. He thought that she would only remember him for the rest of her life. He was eager to come back and see her, but he endured it because he believed that she didn't want anyone else in this world except for him. However, she fell in love with such a mediocre man. In the dark, Roan lay left quietly, just like how he came quietly. Lightning flashed and thunder rumbled throughout the night, only gradually stopping at daybreak. Early in the morning, the fresh air drifted into the apartment, and it felt comfortable. Chin moved. When she opened her eyes, she saw Lan Yu's smiling face. She smiled gently and hugged him. Her voice was very low. "I'm so hungry. It's been too hard at night." He was fascinated by her rare, coquettish behavior. Lan Yu hugged her and kissed her lips. "I'm the one who worked hard." Chin's fingers gently poked his shoulder. "The first rule of lovers is that as my boyfriend, you have to give in to me." Lan Yu caught her fingers. His eyes were deep. "Don't play with fire." She chuckled and leaned on his shoulder. She was a little naughty. "It's you who can't control yourself." "You can't control yourself," she hinted with her slender legs. "I can't control myself." Lan Yu chuckled. "I can't control myself now. Will you accompany me?" Chun bit her lips. "You're a beast." Lan Yu chuckled hoarsely. "You sit in the office every day. You used to be an artist too. Tell me, where did you get your six-pack? Where did you get your energy from?" Chin snorted. Actually, she had always had some moves in the past, but God had really wasted her skin. Not to mention abs, she could not even train her waistline. Until now, her waistline was still smooth. As soon as the clothes were taken off, the woman came out. Lan Yu chuckled. "It's probably because I want to meet you. So you like me very much." Shin lay in his arms and bit him. "If you like me, I'll go make breakfast." She propped herself up and gave him a morning kiss. "I'm going to take a shower, and then I'll wear your shirt as a reward. Okay?" Lan Yu gazed at her for a long time before he chuckled. "It sounds very tempting." He hugged her. "Let's wash together. I'll make breakfast for you after." She did not reject him and allowed him to serve her. Lan Yu doted on her so much that he did not even need to lift a finger. Moreover, he fed her until she was full, as though she was a piglet. Shin lay on the sofa and hooked her leg around him. "Lan Yu, this kind of life seems a little too depraved." "No, I have to go to the hospital tomorrow." Then she complained again. "I'm really afraid that if I have to undergo surgery, my legs will go weak after standing for 2 hours. This bastard, he could stand for 4 to 5 hours. She really did not know if his body was made of iron. Or were all men such beasts? Chapter 2780. Lan Yu kissed her and said, "I'm going to cook." She put her arms around his neck and said, "I can cook, but I can't make love." Lan Yu looked down at her face and chuckled. "Where's the karate master?" He kissed the tip of her nose and said, "Fancy moves, but not practical moves." Shin bit him and kicked him with her long legs. "Go cook." "Okay, Your Majesty." Lan Yu lowered his head and chuckled. Shin pulled him over and kissed him again. "I'll learn to cook for you in the future." Lan Yu's eyes were a little deep. This was probably the most beautiful words of love he had ever heard, especially for someone like Shin. He believed that he was very important in her heart to be able to say such words. He wanted to say something, but in the end, he didn't say anything and just kissed her lips. He went to cook and wash an apple for her. It was red and moist. Shin bit it and read a magazine. Lan Yu saw that she was looking at women's clothes, but most of them were more neutral. Even so, he was already very satisfied. He knew that it wasn't easy to change a person who had been persisting and believing for so long. So he hugged her from behind and kissed her. "Sit up and look. It hurts your eyes." "I like lying like this," Shin said like a rascal. And Lan Yu found that he seemed to like a rascal. She was acting like a spoiled child, which was something that Shin didn't realize herself. In the end, Lan Yu even bit her apple. Shin bit his face. "Don't steal my apple." His eyes were clear as he stared at her, as if he was asking for sex again. "No more." Shin put down the apple and hugged his neck. Her voice was a little low. "It hurts a little." Lan Yu's gaze was a little unpredictable. After a long time, he kissed her. "I'll buy you some medicine later." Unexpectedly, Shin didn't object. He smiled and went to help her cook. While Qin Shun was happily eating, Lan Yu took a cigarette and went downstairs to the pharmacy to buy medicine for her. When he applied the ointment on Qin Shun, it was rare for them to be so violent that the two of them got into a fight. This was probably the best time in one's life. On Monday, Lan Yu drove Qin Shun to the hospital. She had to check Mr. Lin's body today. Mr. Lin was busy every day and had stayed in the hospital for a long time. The situation was changing rapidly, and he did not dare to recuperate. Qin Shun was wearing a white robe. After examining Mr. Lin's body, he took off his mask and smiled. "You can leave the hospital now, but you'd better rest well." At this time, there was no one else in the ward. Mr. Lin sat up and smiled bitterly. "How can I rest in such a position?" Qin Shun responded with a smile and didn't say much. She was still very cautious when it came to Jingyi. Mr. Lin changed the topic. "I heard that Cece and Dr. Qin are quite close." Qin Shun smiled. "Miss Lin is quite cute, but my heart already belongs to someone." Mr. Lin chuckled. "Is it the young man named Lan Yu?" Qin Shun was dressed in men's clothes and nodded with a smile. "Yes." Mr. Lin's expression was a little stunned, but then he smiled. "It's not bad. Young people nowadays dare to say and do what they want. It's different from our era." Qin Shun looked at him. "Sorry." Chapter 2781. He added, "If Cece pesters you again, tell me, and I'll teach her a lesson. Her mother is soft-hearted and can't control her, but she's always afraid of me." Speaking of this, Mr. Qin felt a little regretful. "I've been busy with work all these years and neglected my family. It hasn't been easy for Cece's mother either." He sighed. "Cece can tell me if she's being naughty. If she's talking about a good relationship, I hope you can forgive her. I've always hoped for an outstanding person to guide Cece. She's like a lost lamb and can't find her home." Qin Shun cursed in her heart. Can't find her home? Why didn't he find a shepherd dog for Lin Cece? She felt that Mr. Lin was really good at politics. He had a way with words, trying to trick people into believing him. Mr. Lin looked at Qin Shun and smiled. "Dr. Qin, what's wrong? You don't look too good." Qin Shun smiled reluctantly. "No, I just slept late last night." Mr. Lin nodded understandingly. "Young people don't sleep early like us old people." Qin Shun nodded. Then Mr. Lin, "I'll help you with the discharge procedures." She walked to the door and suddenly turned around. She smiled faintly. "Mr. Lin, Lan Yu is my boyfriend." Mr. Lin was surprised. "Oh, I see." Qin Shun's gaze was calm. "Yes, I can only be his girlfriend because I'm a girl and I've been like this since I was young." This time, Mr. Lin was shocked. He looked at Qin Shun up and down. He couldn't tell at all. Originally, he wanted to ask Qin Shun to follow him and work by his side. It would be convenient for Cece, but now, Qin Shun said that she was a woman. Mr. Lin was stunned and couldn't come back to his senses for a long time. "So, Qin Shun can only thank you for your kindness." Qin Shun smiled faintly and walked out, closing the door. It was a pity that Mr. Lin was in the ward. Although there were rumors that Qin Shun and Lan Yu were a couple, he still admired Qin Shun's character. But now, Cece was probably going to be disappointed. Thinking that his wife had to comfort his daughter again, he rubbed his forehead, feeling a headache. Qin Shun walked out and felt a headache coming on. But now that he had made things clear, Lin Cece probably wouldn't bother him anymore. She walked towards the elevator, thinking that she would call Lan Yu later to tell him about it. Well, that's the girlfriend's responsibility. As she walked, she took out her phone. Just as she was about to make a call, her gaze froze. In the elevator, there was a man standing with his face tilted. Although it was only the side of his face, Qin Shun's whole body seemed to be frozen. She whispered softly, "Ronglei. Ronglei. Ronglei." The elevator closed in front of her. She shook her head, looked at the number, and quickly ran toward the safety stairs. It was Ronglei. She was sure that it was him. Qin Shun ran madly on the safety stairs. This was the 22nd floor. She ran at an astonishing speed, but she couldn't catch up to the elevator. And here, there was only one elevator. When she ran to the first floor, her legs were already weak. Panting, she looked around. The elevator was empty. There was no one. She ran for a long time, but there was still no one. Qin Shin searched for a long time, but everything was like an illusion. It was as if that person had never appeared. Finally, she walked into the elevator. There was a faint smell of cologne. It went into the tip of her nose. Qin Shin closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. Chapter 2782. Qin Shin's body slowly slid down. She fell into the elevator and covered her face with her fingers. It had been so many years. It had been at least 10 years since she was young. That person had always been in her heart, and she had never gotten rid of him. After so long, she still mistook him for someone else. Qin Shin stretched out her fingers and looked at them with trembling hands. After a long time, she said to herself, Qin Shin, it was all an illusion. He was gone. Ronlei was gone. It was just a man who looked like him. Yes, it couldn't be him. He was no longer there. That leap had already ended his life. Qin Shin's face was already covered in tears. She stood in the elevator and looked at her own eyes. In the past, she had never thought that one day she would forget that part of the past. But just when she wanted to get over it, she realized that the past had become a demon in her heart. In the mirror, there were tears on her face. They were tears that she hadn't shed for many years. She stood in the elevator alone for a long time. It wasn't until Lan Yu called that she woke up. She reached out and answered the phone hesitantly. Qin Shin, I'll pick you up at noon. Lan Yu stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window in the office and looked at the blue sky and white clouds outside. He was in a good mood. Ziyi said that there's a restaurant that serves really good food. Qin Shin was a foodie, and he was willing to spoil her. Even if he drove for an hour to take her out for lunch, he wouldn't find it troublesome. At night, he was more willing to cook in his villa or her apartment, drink a glass of red wine, and spend a pleasant night. As Lan Yu spoke, a gentle smile appeared on his handsome face. Qin Shin was silent for a moment and said in a low voice, I might not be able to do it at noon. I have emergency surgery later. Lan Yu complained, You don't belong to Sheng Yuan now, and they still use you like this. This surgery is quite risky. Qin Shin leaned against the wall and said quietly, I can't talk to you anymore. I have to prepare for the surgery. With that, she hung up. Lan Yu wanted to say something, but the other side had already hung up. He allowed a long sigh and shrugged. After thinking about it, he still ordered a vegetarian restaurant's takeaway for her. He was especially careful with his order, and the final instructions were 2 lines long. After that, Lan Yu looked out of the window and smiled. Would Qin Shin think that he was too clingy? A girl like Qin Shin should be more independent. However, after spending the past few days with her, he felt that she wasn't. On the contrary, if someone was willing to take care of her, she would be very confused and dependent. He liked it too. So now, he was a little disappointed. Lan Yu smiled at himself. It was a faint smile, but he was in an extremely good mood. This was probably how people in love were like. He reached out his hand and pressed it against his forehead. Then, he picked up his phone and opened her photo. A day apart feels like an autumn. Xingyuan Hospital. Qin Shin was sitting in her office. She had made 5 cups of coffee for herself, but none of them tasted as good as she wanted. In the end, she gave up. She stood in front of the window and took out a long and thin cigarette, smoking it slowly. She rarely smoked, but other than smoking, she didn't want to do anything else today. As long as she closed her eyes, she would think of that face. Ronlei. Qin Shin took a deep puff of her cigarette. She would never be like this. It was because the shock she received today was too strong. There was a knock on the door. She turned her head and stared at the door. Chapter 2783. There was a knock on the door. She turned her head and stared at the door. It was as if a face that she couldn't get out of her mind would suddenly appear behind the door. After a long time, the knocking on the door continued. She pursed her lips and finally went to open the door. A delicate-looking delivery boy stood at the door. When he saw Qin Shin, he was obviously stunned. I'm looking for Dr. Qin. He was holding an exquisite takeout box in his hand. It looked like a high-class meal that cost a few hundred yuan. Qin Shin looked at him. That's me. The delivery boy had never seen such a good-looking man. For some reason, he blushed and tried to explain, I'm looking for a female doctor. That's me. Qin Shin's tone was indifferent. Then, The deliveryman was stunned and looked at Qin Shun from head to toe. Qin Shun took the takeout box in his hand. Mine? The delivery boy finally came back to his senses. He said softly, yes. Oh, by the way, this is a note from Mr. Lan. The delivery boy carefully took the note. It's a note from Mr. Lanyu. We printed it in our shop. Please accept it, Dr. Qin. Qin Shun took it. Then I'm leaving. The delivery boy stared at Qin Shun as he retreated. Qin Shun smiled and closed the door. After the door was closed, the world was separated again. Only she and Lan Yu's heart-shaped takeout were left. Qin Shun opened it gently. The food was very sumptuous. Moreover, it was really childish for a grown-up to ask for heart-shaped rice. She chuckled softly and picked up the note on the side. There were a few lines on it. It was a poem from the Tang Dynasty. Qin Shun looked at it for a long time. Then, she put the note in her drawer and looked at the takeout. She really couldn't eat it anymore. In the end, she threw it into the trash can. She sat on the chair and smoked from afternoon to night. At 8 o'clock, the phone on the table rang. She picked it up. Over there was Lan Yu. He seemed to be a little cautious. Qin Shun, are you off work? I'll get off work soon, Qin Shun said after thinking for a while. Then, he walked toward the bathroom with his phone in hand. Lan Yu's voice was light. I'm at the supermarket now. Do you want me to pick you up? There's a car in the hospital parking lot. I'll drive home myself. Qin Shun sounded a little tired. Lan Yu, I'm going back to the apartment today. I'm a little tired. I'll go to your place tomorrow. Lan Yu was silent for a while, then said in a low voice, If you're tired, can't you give me a chance to take care of you? Qin Shun, we're a couple now. He continued, I'm not being unreasonable. I just don't want to be pushed away by you anymore. Qin Shun was stunned for a moment, and then smiled lightly. Then come to my apartment. See you later. She agreed very readily, but Lan Yu was not very happy. Instead, his heart was heavy. He could feel that there was something on Qin Shun's mind. An hour later, when they met at Qin Shun's apartment, he was even more sure. Although Qin Shun had taken a shower, he still smelled a strong smell of cigarettes on her. He frowned. He remembered that she told him that she had an important operation. If that was the case, she wouldn't have had time to smoke so much. Qin Shun was never a person who liked cigarettes. Lan Yu kissed her for a while and said in a low voice, Rest for a while. I'm going to Qin Fan. Chapter 2784. She sat there with her back straight. Her gray shirt and coffee-colored trousers made her look very handsome. As a man, Lan Yu had to admit that he was inferior to her. He looked at her quietly. She seemed to be immersed in her own world, and he was forgotten by her. He shook his head and told himself that it was just his illusion. In fact, it wasn't like that. Qin Shun was just in a bad mood and too tired. He tried hard to convince himself. Finally, he went into the kitchen and made a sumptuous dinner. Qin Shun had only moved a few times when Lan Yu said, Did you like the lunch today? Qin Shun was stunned for a moment, and then she smiled faintly. It was pretty good. It's good that you like it. Lan Yu looked at her and said slowly, This restaurant is very good at takeout. If you are too tired at noon, I can order for you every day. No need, Qin Shun said quickly, and then he looked at her more deeply. Qin Shun changed her words. Okay. Lan Yu smiled and grabbed her hand. I thought you would complain that I won't accompany you at noon. Qin Shun looked at his hand and was stunned for a long time. Then she whispered, Do you want to have lunch together at noon? Of course, we're in the phase of love now. Lan Yu smiled. Qin Shun was a little stunned again. In the phase of love? Then what was Rong Lei? Her originally determined mood was a little fuzzy now. She was very confused, and she needed to calm down. She had no appetite and only ate a little reluctantly. However, all of this was seen by Lan Yu. He didn't say anything and quietly cleaned up the apartment. He went to take a shower. When he came out, Qin Shun was still sitting in front of the piano playing a song. He had never heard the song before, but the melody was very nice. Lan Yu only had a bath towel around his waist, and he quietly wiped himself with a towel in his hand. When she finished playing, he threw down the towel and hugged her from behind. Qin Shun, don't play anymore. His hand gently rubbed her fingers, and his voice was also indifferent. I will feel sorry for you. Qin Shun didn't move, but just sat quietly. Lan Yu's thin lips kissed her neck, and his voice was low. Can you tell me what happened? Qin Shun, I'm worried about you. You were worried about me? Qin Shen's voice was a little hoarse. She looked up and looked into his unfathomable eyes. Lan Yu's answer was to kiss the corner of her mouth, bit by bit, and comfort her little by little. Qin Shen's hand on his waist, and then he smiled. Lan Yu of Qin, he said. Qin Shun, you, Qin, and Qin Lan. Lan Yu was stunned for a moment. Then he smiled. Of course not. Although medicine is very advanced now, it's not very possible. Lan Yu looked down, and his voice was very low. But there was once a person who had such an ability. Lan Yu sat next to her. Qin Shun? He frowned, feeling the danger. Yes, he was worried about her now. Qin Shun was a very rational person, and she would never talk nonsense. It was my mentor. Qin Shen's voice was very low. But he is no longer here. Lan Yu didn't quite understand. She looked at him and said very softly, this requires both the ability to go back in time and the top medical technology. Lan Yu frowned. Go back in time. To be precise, it is to reverse a person's physical function to the point where it can be cured. Qin Shen explained, and her voice was a little blank. My mentor has experimented on animals, but humans, he has never done it. Chapter 2785. Lan Yu looked at her pale face. Qin Shun, did you find out that someone is using this technology now? Otherwise, he believed that she wouldn't have mentioned it, and this kind of black technology would have been buried forever, because it was too dangerous. If it was obtained by an ambitious person, the world would be overturned. Qin Shun looked at Lan Yu and smiled faintly. No, it's just that today is the anniversary of my mentor's death, so I thought of it. Lan Yu hugged her and kissed her hair. Don't think too much. Qin Shun looked down and didn't say anything. Lan Yu carried her to the master bedroom. In fact, he didn't have that kind of intention, but he hoped that something could distract her. He put her on the bed and kissed her as if he was worshipping her. Her clothes fell to the ground one by one. He was aroused and whispered in her ear. But when he wanted her, Qin Shun suddenly woke up from her intoxication. Lan Yu. She gently pushed him away and looked a little hoarse. Sorry, I'm a little tired. I don't want to do it. Lan Yu turned over and lay flat on the side. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her again. It's okay. He kissed her forehead for a while, then let go of her and said in a low voice, I'm going to the bathroom. Qin Shun knew what he was going to do and felt a little guilty. She lay flat for a long time, trying to get rid of the figure in her mind. Qin Shun had never thought that the unforgettable memory would become a haunting nightmare for her. In the end, she opened the bathroom door. She could imagine what Lan Yu was doing. At that moment, there was a subtle uneasiness in the air. Qin Shun looked at him, walked over, and threw herself into Lan Yu's arms. She put her little face on his shoulder and whispered, I'll help you. Lan Yu couldn't believe his good luck, but he really couldn't bear to let her do this. Thus, he said in a slightly hoarse voice, I'll do it myself. He hugged her and pressed her body into his embrace. Qin Shun listened to his overly excited gasps and felt even more guilty in her heart. She raised her head and kissed him. Lan Yu, do you love me very much? He paused for a moment before replying, I love you very much. Then, a certain man became a quick shooter. He was barely a few seconds away. In the air, things were even more subtle. Qin Shun's cold mood improved a little. He leaned on his shoulder and laughed softly. Lan Yu was a little annoyed. When he calmed down, he reached out and pinched the tip of her nose. It's all your fault. Qin Shun looked at him eagerly. Why is it me? Because of you, I'm cold to you. Lan Yu pressed against her and murmured, Do you want to make amends now? Men cared a lot about this kind of thing, especially in front of their women. Qin Shun chuckled softly. Is that so? You can do whatever you want. Lan Yu stared at her eyes without moving his eyes. After a long time, he suddenly stretched out his hand and pinned her body against the hot wall. Lan Yu. Qin Shun was a little uneasy and called his name in a low voice. There was a touch of fanaticism in Lan Yu's eyes. Be good. I'll make you happier. Qin Shun's pupils dilated as she watched him squat down. Thus, this night became a little painful and a little messy. Late at night, Lan Yu turned over and reached out to the person beside him. Chapter 2786. Qin Shin didn't like to sleep in his arms, but it didn't matter after he fell asleep, so he often hugged her in the middle of the night. But Lan Yu's hand missed. He frowned and opened his eyes to look at the emptiness in the darkness. He raised his hand and the light was turned on. Qin Shin wasn't in the bedroom. Lan Yu sat up, lifted the quilt, and walked to the living room naked. There was a slight smell of smoke in the dark living room. Although the windows were open and the wind was strong, Lan Yu could still feel it. In the dim light, he saw Qin Shin standing in front of the French window. She had changed into a set of daily clothes and was smoking by the window. He was sure that some of what Qin Shin had said tonight was true and some was false. She was upset because of what she had discovered. Lan Yu watched quietly, but Qin Shin had already noticed him. She turned her head, looked at him for a moment, put out the cigarette, and said calmly, "Did I wake you up?" Lan Yu walked over and said, "I found you weren't here, so I came out." He took the cigarette, but from her hand. "Why are you smoking again? It's better for girls to smoke less." He didn't object to her smoking because he knew that she had been used to it over the years. She was usually very abstemious and not a heavy smoker. She might only smoke 1 or 2 cigarettes a week. But tonight, Lan Yu looked at the dozen cigarette butts in the ashtray, which was enough to show how upset she was. "If you have something on your mind, maybe you can share it with me," he said casually and took her to the sofa without turning on a light. Sometimes, the night could make people relax. He placed Qin Shin on his shoulder and turned his head to kiss her cheek. He didn't force her to answer. Qin Shin's world and his were not the same world. Unless Qin Shin was willing to say it, he couldn't force her. Qin Shin shook her head. Maybe she's too tired. She didn't see Lan Yu's disappointed eyes. She was so upset and still hadn't told him anything, which meant that she hadn't opened her heart to him yet. Lan Yu sighed slightly and didn't say anything else. He just hugged her. She leaned into his embrace and watched the sky turn white. She murmured, "It's a new day." Lan Yu smiled. "Qin Shin, just like your name, you'll have a new day every day." He watched with her, the sun leaping up. In the next few days, although Qin Shin looked normal, Lan Yu could clearly feel the changes in her. She was no longer as clingy as before. She began to like playing the piano. She began to like standing in front of the French windows for an entire night. Of course, her addiction to smoking seemed to be getting stronger and stronger. Every day at noon, he still sent someone to deliver her lunch, a lunchbox. Because she did not have time to accompany him for lunch, she would be very busy every day. Except at night, he could not see her. This kind of life slowly made Lan Yu a little impetuous. In love, the most terrible thing was that the heart was not clear. He thought that maybe Qin Shin hadn't thought it through. She was regretting it now. He liked her and loved her. Naturally, he wanted her to be well and happy. If she said that she hadn't thought it through, he could still give her a little more time. Lan Yu sat in the car, smoking and looking at the hospital building in front of him. His mother had taken an X-ray here before, and he came to get it on the way. It was 12 o'clock in the afternoon, but as her boyfriend, he was a little hesitant about whether he should go upstairs to look for her. Chapter 2787. They had actually become the most familiar strangers. After smoking a cigarette, he finally decided to go and see her. She was a girl, so he had to take a step back. It was every boyfriend's duty to care about her when she had something on her mind. Lan Yu opened the car door and walked straight to the hospital lobby. Along the way, he met many familiar nurses. When the nurses saw him, they all smiled and greeted him. Qin Shin grabbed a nurse and asked, "Is Dr. Qin here?" At 10:30 in the morning, he called to pick up a scan. Qin Shin said that she was going to have surgery soon and would only be out at 2 in the afternoon, so he wasn't sure if she could eat at this time. The nurse looked at him and was a little surprised. Of course Dr. Qin is here. He came over these days just to check in. The hospital didn't assign him any tasks. Lan Yu frowned, but after a moment, he lowered his eyes and said, "Got it." He walked towards the elevator. In the elevator, he saw that his expression was a little ugly. He told himself that Qin Shin wasn't an ordinary girl. She just didn't like to be too intimate. She just liked to have her own personal space. When the elevator reached that floor, he walked out. When he stood at the door of Qin Shen's office, he actually felt nervous like never before. He reached out and knocked on the door. After 5 seconds, a slightly hoarse voice came from inside. "Come in." Lan Yu opened the door. Qin Shen happened to look up. Their eyes met. Her eyes were full of surprise. Then, she asked very slowly, "Why are you here?" "Didn't I say that my mother's scan was coming, so I came to take a look?" Lan Yu said, pretending to be relaxed. Then, just as he was about to casually ask if she had eaten, his eyes swept to the rubbish bin at the side. Inside, there was a neatly packed lunchbox, which had not been opened yet. He asked someone to send it. She told him that the lunchbox was good and that she ate it every day. So, she didn't eat it and threw it into the rubbish bin without even looking at it. At this moment, Lan Yu's mood was indescribably sour. It was like a child trying to give something to an adult, but the adult didn't even have the desire to look at it. His eyes narrowed, but he still smiled, even if it was a very stiff smile. He said hoarsely, "Chun-Chin." Qin Shen's gaze also fell on the trash can. She stared at it for a long time before looking up at him. Lan Yu exhaled. "You rest. I have an important meeting to attend in the afternoon." He even squeezed out a smile. "I'll make you your favorite curry rice tonight." Just as he was about to leave, Qin Shen stopped him. "Lan Yu, let's split up for now." With his back to her, Lan Yu clenched his fists. "Qin Shen, temporarily separate?" He turned his head and looked at her. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "Lan Yu, I'm sorry. I haven't been in a good mood recently. This is unfair to you. So, let's separate for now." "So, when you're in a good mood, you'll summon me and visit me? Really?" Lan Yu wasn't without a temper, but he always gave in to her. Qin Shen pursed her lips. "That's not what I meant." "Then what do you mean?" Lan Yu's voice was low. "Do you think this is fair to me?" He said word by word, "Husband and wife, or lovers." "Qin Shen, do you understand the meaning of these two words?" Chapter 2788. Qin Shen lowered his eyes. "Lan Yu, it's not that I don't care about you. Don't think that way, I need time." She looked at him and said softly, "I'm serious about you, and I'm serious about what I said." "Lan Yu, I'm sorry, but I really can't." Lan Yu stared in her eyes, his gaze burning. After a long time, he suddenly smiled faintly. "How long do I have to wait? 1 year, 2 years, or a lifetime?" Men could be sharp sometimes, and he said straightforwardly, "Qin Shen, how long will it take for you to forget him?" Qin Shen's expression changed slightly, and then it became a little ugly. "Lan Yu, did I hit the nail on the head?" Lan Yu's voice was very low. "Qin Shen, but I still want to believe you this once. I'll wait. Wait for you to find me." By the end, his voice was already hoarse. In this relationship, Lan Yu was too proactive, too humble. He treated Qin Shen like a god, but such love was nothing in her heart. Lan Yu, was just a person in a vegetative state, and the person in her heart was a dead person. Did she want him to fight a zombie in a vegetative state? Lan Yu's eyes were dyed with a storm, but he loved her too much, so he didn't want to force her. He left, and when he walked to the door, he paused for a moment. "In the future, eat something for lunch. If it's not to your liking, then remember to eat it yourself." After he said that, he walked out in a straight line. As for Qin Shen, her heart was sour and bitter, and she couldn't put it into words. She knew that she had let Lan Yu down, and she had let him down. She had gone back on what she had promised. No, she was swaying left and right. She clearly wanted to forget that part of the past, but after seeing that person who looked so similar, she couldn't control herself. She didn't stop Lan Yu from leaving, because she couldn't give him anything right now. She couldn't give him a normal life, and she couldn't give him love. She had always been a decisive person, and continuing this kind of life was torturous for her. She could feel that she had hurt him. Therefore, it was better to temporarily separate. Qin Shen stared blankly at the door for a long time before picking up the unopened lunchbox. She opened the bag and then the lid of the box. It was still filled with the rice made with love. It was very fragrant, and there were also her favorite dishes. She looked at it for a while, took the spoon, and ate little by little until it was all gone. Finally, she took out her phone, typed a message, and sent it out. "I've finished my lunchbox. Lan Yu, I've never eaten anything from the trash before." After sending it out, she had been waiting. However, she did not receive a reply from him. Thinking that he was really angry, she sent another message. "Send it to me tomorrow, okay?" Still no reply. Qin Shin stared at his phone in a daze. He was really angry, but she didn't expect that on the other end of the line, Lin Cece was sitting in front of the computer. Her slender fingers tapped a few times, and then she looked at the man behind her. "All right, I've hacked her phone. Every message she sends to Lan will be sent to your phone." Of course, there was also her phone, but she was smart enough not to mention it. The man behind her was tall and slender, wearing a high-end custom-made Armani suit. Lin Cece thought that it must have been hard on him to dress like this on such a hot day. Chapter 2789. This kind of cold temperament was somewhat familiar to her. She thought for a long time before she remembered. Qin Shin seemed to be this type. She and the man in front of her were very similar. Not only in appearance, but in behavior and temperament, they were very similar. They must have been imitating each other for a long time to be so similar. Lin Cece smiled, and her smile was a little playful. So that was it. She looked at the man in front of her and smiled sweetly. "Are you Qin Shin's ex-boyfriend?" Ronglai's eyes were deep and very cold. "It's none of your business. After we worked together, you think it's none of my business?" Lin Cece chuckled and typed a line of code on the notebook with her fingers, and then a string of information appeared. Ronglai, the first heir of a Chinese family in France, died 12 years ago. Lin Cece looked at Ronglai and smiled. Now Mr. Rong is still alive and well. "Can you explain?" Ronglai narrowed his eyes, and there was already danger in his eyes. Lin Cece raised her head slightly. "You don't dare to kill me. I have made more than 10 copies of our meeting or the video. If something happens to me, your identity as a third-world person will be exposed." Lin Cece stood up, looked at Ronglai, and said coldly, "It doesn't matter if you die, but I don't know if the organization behind Mr. Rong can tolerate it. Has anyone told you not to be too smart?" Ronglai's eyes were cold. Lin Cece chuckled. "If you're not smart enough to cooperate with a zombie like Mr. Rong, your brain will be bitten out by Mr. Rong in minutes." She said the most bloody words with the sweetest smile. Ronglai squinted and stared at her. After a long time, he smiled faintly. He leaned over, put his lips on Lin Cece's lips, and whispered, "I am a human." His lips were very warm. Lin Cece looked up and stared at his eyes. She stretched out her slender little finger and put on his heart. But this heart has changed. Ronglai's black eyes locked on her for a long time, and then he slowly walked away. Lin Cece chuckled. It was really interesting, a person who came back from the dead. There must be a big secret behind him, and this secret must be related to Qin Shin. Otherwise, this man who was full of faith would not come back to find Qin Shin. In other words, the most important thing in this man's heart was never Qin Shin. It was him, the so-called faith. Lin Cece smiled unrestrainedly. Qin Shin, new or Qin Shin. Lin Cece of the Qin Shin. Ronglai held his phone and looked at the message that Qin Shin sent to the man. Qin of Qin of Qin of Qin. Qin. Qin of Qin, Qin's love. Chun. Qin of Qin of Chun. Chun. Ronglai closed his eyes slightly, and he could still imagine the scene of his morning entangled with that man on that stormy night. He can't forget that scene. He raised his head, and his Adam's apple moved slightly. It was extremely sexy. Anna approached him gently, leaned over, and kissed his Adam's apple. While kissing, she murmured, "Just take her back. Why waste time?" Ronglai suddenly opened his eyes and looked at Anna. Chapter 2790. Anna's body froze for a moment before she retreated and lowered her head respectfully. "I was rash, young Master Rong." Ronglai's long and narrow eyes were filled with a storm. However, his voice was deep and slow. What I want is not only Chun, but also her heart. Anna's heart skipped a beat, and she didn't dare to say another word. Xingyuan Hospital. Qin Chen looked at her phone. She had checked her phone more than 10 times in the afternoon. However, she didn't get a reply. Before she got off work, she thought about it and decided to give him a call. After the phone rang 7 or 8 times, it was finally picked up. Lan Yu's voice was a little hoarse. What's the matter? He was indifferent. Qin Chen wasn't easy to talk to. She hesitated for a moment before asking, I sent you a few messages, but you didn't reply. Are you going to make up with me and welcome me to your apartment immediately? Lan Yu's tone wasn't good. Qin Chen sighed. Must you do this? Lan Yu smiled faintly. He sat in the car and said quietly, Qin Chen, in your heart, I'm an unreasonable man, am I? Or are you coaxing me like a child? Anyway, I'm easy to coax, so you can come and go as you please, right? Qin Chen felt a sense of helplessness. She was silent for a long time before saying softly, if you're not in the mood to talk now, and you must do this, then let's talk another day. Then, she waited for him to hang up. However, Lan Yu didn't. He didn't hang up, but he didn't say anything either. The two of them were frozen like that, and they could only hear each other's breathing. After a long time, Qin Chen sighed. Let's do this first. Let's have a meal together when we're free. This was the biggest concession she could make. She really wasn't in the mood or the ability to live with him. Ronglai's past was like a black hole, leading her down. She couldn't do anything, and these were things she couldn't say out loud. Finally, she murmured, I need time. You have to think it through. Do you want to be with me, right? Lan Yu said indifferently, You don't mind if I go to the mirror, do you? Is that what you mean? Qin Chen was speechless for a moment. After a moment, she whispered, I believe you won't be unfair to me. These words still angered him. Lan Yu cursed, You're fucking being like this. Is that fair to me? With that, he hung up. Qin Chen looked at his phone and couldn't help but roll his eyes. Childish. However, the childish man did not call her again. To be honest, she was still a little disappointed. Qin Chen scolded himself for being cheap and unreasonable. She wasn't like this in the past. Actually, Lan Yu was right. It was because he was too accommodating to her that she would easily say that they were going to separate temporarily. Or rather, he thought that he had been played by her. Qin Chen tidied up the table. She thought about it and decided to go to Qin Mu's place for dinner. She hadn't been there for days, and Zhou Chengwang needed to be checked. Moreover, perhaps after going there, his mood would be a little better. Qin Chen took off her white robe, picked up her coat, and walked out. She entered the elevator and looked at herself in the mirror. She couldn't help thinking about the person she had met in the elevator that day. She closed her eyes and forced the image out of her mind. She had to do it. She didn't want to be affected by the past anymore. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.